What's up, everybody? Pitiful here, coming at you with a review of the new Vended album, their debut self-titled album that was released 2 weeks ago now, September 20th. Finally starting to catch up on these album reviews that I've been meaning to do, just between being under the weather a little bit and just going through a few other miscellaneous personal things and being busy and stuff. Finally getting to these reviews. If you're watching this video, you're most likely familiar with this band, but just in case you're not, Vended is a band who I jokingly call Slipknot Jr. because drummer Simon Crahan is the son of Sean Crahan from Slipknot, their, alt percussionist, and vocalist Griffin Taylor is the son of Slipknot's Corey Taylor. And before I even listened to this album, I wanted to be able to give it a review in a way that didn't even have to reference or bring up Slipknot whatsoever. But unfortunately, I can't do that. So to address the low-hanging fruit that comes with listening to this album, I have to address the fact that it sounds just like Slipknot. I'll kind of sum up at the end what the kind of final end result is of that, but as far as smaller details, there are some benefits and some drawbacks to them sounding so much like Slipknot. One of the benefits, in my opinion, is I think Simon Crahan on drums has a great performance on here, and he actually reminds me a lot of Joey Jordison. Specifically in the way that, and this might sound like I'm trying to criticize him or Joey, and not at all my intention by saying this, it's in the way that he sounds almost somewhat sloppy with his drums. I know that's kind of a weird praise to give, but this slight sloppiness, if you want to call that, just for lack of a better term, actually really adds to the chaotic nature of the music. That's why Joey Jordison was such a great drummer for Slipknot. And on songs like Paint the Skin and Pitiful, you could really hear the influence from Joey on Simon's drumming. But probably the biggest comparison I could make from Vended to Slipknot is just Griffin Taylor's vocals. He sounds phenomenal on this record. I think he has a great vocal performance, especially when you listen to some of Vended's earlier singles. I definitely think he's grown a lot as a vocalist just in that short time. But whether it's his dark, nihilistic lyrics, or his aggressive, barking style screams, or his moody, detached, clean vocals, or just the fact that as Corey Taylor's son, he just sounds exactly like his dad. There is an uncanny, undeniable similarity to Slipknot, especially in the vocals. Like, when I first heard the chorus to the song The Far Side, you could have told me that was Corey Taylor singing, and I would have believed it. He sounds almost identical, and that might be why there aren't too many clean vocals on here, which, he sounds great. Like I said, this is not knocking him as a vocalist whatsoever. It's purely identifying the factors that make this album so similar to Slipknot's music. I actually, though, don't think his harsh vocals are quite as reminiscent of Corey's vocals. I do think his screams sound a bit more layered versus Corey's, which at times sound a bit more thin and a bit more isolated. I'm not exactly sure if that's just his performance of it and the way he's screaming, or if it's more of a production factor, but either way, I do think his screams separate themselves a bit better, actually way better than the clean vocals. Now, kind of widening the scope here and getting into the album as a whole and the real quality of it, I think some of the best aspects of this album is that kind of just bluntness and aggression that comes with it. Like, there's some real, genuinely heavy stuff on here, stuff that might even be heavier than Slipknot. Like that intro to the song Paint the Skin with the blast beats and the tremolo riffing on it, that would not sound out of place on any modern death metal record. The song Nihilisn, which is very appropriately titled, also just has some real in-your-face, dark, aggressive energy to it, although the outro just makes me laugh so much when Griffin is just yelling, "Shut up and get the fuck inside." He sounds like he's yelling at his dog for barking at the neighbors. But again, it's that kind of just not necessarily immature, but just very blunt energy that makes that song good. It is very reminiscent of early Slipknot, especially their self-titled in Iowa. And I'll be honest, there really isn't a single song on here that I dislike. I think a couple of the songs have parts that are a bit redundant, like Paint the Skin and Pitiful kind of have similar melodies that come back and they do feel a bit reused, albeit in different ways. They're a bit heavier on Paint the Skin, but then Pitiful, you get those kind of background clean vocal melodies from Griffin that wouldn't be out of place on Drowning Pool's Sinner album that actually really reminded me of that album. And I do like the emphasis on mood in those parts of the songs. I actually kind of wish there was more of that. Unfortunately, the majority of that emphasis on mood gets placed on these several just overused interlude tracks that are just all over this fucking album. Anyone who watches my content knows that I'm always very critical about these interludes. It's very rare that I actually find them to add stuff to the album. And I'm not saying that any of them are musically poor or bad or make me cringe or anything like that. They just feel much more like they are only serving to take up space as opposed to really adding to the album. It's like they just said, okay, we need to beef up this album a little bit because it still looks kind of small, so let's just throw an interlude here and to space out the songs and make it look a bit more full. So that definitely detracted from the listening experience for me, at least as somebody who likes listening to albums as a unit, because especially with these heavy cuts that are kind of spaced apart with these ambient interludes, it doesn't really give you a chance to fully grasp onto the energy and lock in and really just let the album just keep coming at you. It's just every time the album starts to build that energy, it just gets instantly killed off by these interludes. But I think my biggest criticism for this album, and again, just it's the low-hanging fruit, but I have to address it. It's just the fact that it sounds so much like Slipknot that this album really doesn't have its own identity, in any way. Like, for the majority of this album, rather than it making me want to hit the repeat button and listen to it again, it kind of just makes me want to re-listen to Iowa. And you'd think with, these guys being sons of the guys in Slipknot, they would want to kind of set themselves apart. I'm sure they grew up listening to this music so much, and I'm sure they feel pressured and boxed in to do that. You'd think it would make them not want to do that and kind of want to branch out a little bit. So maybe it's more of a record label thing, making them, sound so much like Slipknot. But it's a little much for me, and it makes the music feel a bit calculated and a bit disingenuous. They're kind of, because Slipknot is such a big band, it's almost comes off like they're trying to just kind of, ride the Slipknot wave a little bit and get listeners purely just from the fact that it sounds like Slipknot. And I get it, it's their first album. Maybe the next album will start drifting away from that. I hope they do, because I think it'll just be a lot more interesting to kind of take that Slipknot sound and incorporate more modern takes on it, maybe a bit more of the hardcore, deathcore sound, which I know the guys in this band are fans of. Take Paleface Swiss, for example. Their new song is fucking awesome, by the way. So in conclusion, this is not a bad album by any means. I do really like the production on this album, by the way. I'm not sure if I had really singled that out yet, but again, Griffin Taylor's vocals sound really full. The drums sound awesome. The guitars have that real mean tone to it. There just isn't really enough for me that this album does to get sequential replay value. And I really hope that they decide to branch out a bit more on their next album. And for now, I got to give this album a 17 out of 30. But as always, make sure to comment your thoughts on this album below. I love to hear them. I love to discuss them. And feel free to subscribe for more rock and metal related content. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace.